They're the two European leaders stepping up to bolster defence in the face of diminishing support from Donald Trump's US administration. Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer are gathering together a coalition of the willing to help bring about peace in Ukraine. But do they have what it takes to protect Europe's sovereignty, and can they really work together? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, the British Prime Minister and French President appear to have put aside past differences between the two nations to work together for the good of Europe. Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron are establishing a new coalition after President Trump opened negotiations with Russia without Ukraine or Europe at the table. So, can these two men help save Europe?
A former human rights lawyer turned politician, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is known more for his pragmatism than charisma. French President Emmanuel Macron, an investment banker whose political rise many would say helped by his charm and statesmanlike manner. The two men are forging a close relationship to bring an end to the war in Ukraine and bolster Europe's security. Putting behind them the divisions instigated by Brexit, to gather and lead a coalition of the willing, a peacekeeping force deployed to Ukraine should a ceasefire be agreed to deter further Russian attacks. It comes as a result of Donald Trump distancing US foreign policy from Europe.
I'm clear that the UK is ready to put boots on the ground and planes in the air to support a deal, working together with our allies, because that is the only way that peace will last.
We now have a strategy to fully rearm Europe. In other words, to re-equip ourselves and regain our full independence over the next 5 years.
As Europe steps up, the two leaders still know the importance of keeping the US on side. During his visit to Washington, Starmer delivered a letter from King Charles inviting him on a state visit to the UK.
It is, and that's quite a signature, isn't it? Beautiful.
And Macron, who built a relationship with Trump during the US president's first term, is not afraid of stepping in to correct him.
Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total effort, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money, to be clear.
Macron and Starmer have so far got 31 nations in the coalition of the willing. But do both leaders have what it takes to secure and protect European sovereignty, and can they effectively work together?
Well, let's meet our guests joining us in the studio today. I'm delighted to say we have the journalist and podcast host of Ctrl, Alt, Deceit, Nina dos Santos, and Bence Nemeth. He is an associate professor in defence studies, that's at King's College London. Joining us from Marseille in the south of France, we have Raphael Liogier. He is Professor of Sciences, Po X. And lastly, in Paris, we have John Keiger. He is former research director at the Department of Politics and International Studies, that's at the University of Cambridge. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. Raphael, to you. So the US and Russia want to basically sideline Europe, step forward the French and the Brits.
Yeah, I think that there is nothing better than the common enemy to feel a new kind of solidarity. And I think it's just incredible what is actually happening on that aspect. It's like if we were overcoming or even forgetting about the Brexit nowadays because these new alliance with the US and Russia.
And John, for more than a century, we've had the Entente Cordiale. Are we looking now at a nouveau Entente?
Yes, well, of course, the Entente Cordiale is even older than you suggested, because it goes right back to sort of 1843, the so-called First Entente Cordiale. And then there were, of course, two cases in 1940 and 1956, when it was even suggested that France and Britain become one single entity as a country. And so that is a kind of starting block for Macron and Starmer if they really want to get going.
And John, you think this is very positive from a European perspective, what we're seeing at the moment, you know, the warmth of the relationship and them working together. They clearly have a good, solid working relationship.
Well, I think they have a fairly solid working relationship. But of course, it all depends what you mean by Europe, whether you mean the European Union or whether you mean Europe as a continent. Because things are working out reasonably well between France and Britain as far as Europe is concerned. But the EU dimension is a little bit different. Because if you look at the composition of what is being suggested as a sort of peacekeeping force led by France and Britain, then for the moment anyway, most of the main suggestions for peacekeeping contributions are coming from outside of Europe. So from Britain, if it's the EU, it's Turkey, it's Australia, New Zealand, Canada. The contributions from within inside the European Union seem to be a little bit more sticky at the moment.
And Nina, to you, the future of Europe really does now hinge on these two countries and what they can find militarily.
Yeah, as you just heard there, cometh the hour, cometh the entente cordiale, but also cometh the competition as well, because remember that France and the UK are the big defence manufacturers with the nuclear weapons of this part of the world, and inherently there is quite a bit of, competition between those two countries. The UK obviously having Brexited, it's in a rather unique position. What we've learned just, in fact, this week is that France has put a lot of pressure on its other European Union allies and members of that bloc to shut the UK out of a big deal that would allow its own weapons manufacturers to take orders from a €150 billion fund that the EU is putting together for its member states to try and rearm as soon as possible. So you can see that, yes, this is a close relationship, but you can also see that self-interest sometimes prevails, definitely when it comes to that relationship between London and Paris.
Bence, militarily then, spell out for us how important for Europe is that relationship between the two capital cities?
No, it's absolutely crucial. And I just would like to add that although at the moment the UK, it seems, will not be able to cooperate in the framework of the €150 billion loan structure, but the UK, if it can negotiate an agreement between the European Union itself in security and defence, it will be able to join it. But the problem is that France tries to link this issue to fishing rights and also different trade issues. But it's absolutely crucial that these two countries go forward and coordinate their efforts.
So, Raphael, it begs the question, can the French be trusted?
I mean, I don't think that the French can be trusted like neither the British or the Germans. It's just the interest, the objective interest that can be trusted. But I think that there is something that is very important in Europe that is actually happening now. And to understand it, we need to distinguish Europe and the European Union. And now it's like if Europe, and I'm not talking about the European Union, is becoming a new, gravity center of the world. Even on an economical point of view, when the euro is becoming more secure currency than the dollar, step by step. And I think that is very important. It's like if this new axis with Russia and the US was defining a new division in the world. On one side, you had like an oligarchic tendency, and on the other side, the resistance of democracy. And the resistance of democracy will be symbolized by this new Europe that might not be the European Union.
So, John, to you, it's probably not a great time for Britain to not be in the European Union right now.
Well, there are other forums apart from the European Union. And the European Union has, of course, with it an awful lot of additional recommendations and regulations that would tie Britain to, would lose some of its freedom that it grasped during the Brexit period. And so even the Labour government, and Mr. Starmer, Sir Keir Starmer, was a Remainer, even he doesn't want to go down that very difficult path of taking Britain back into the European Union or into even the single market. So the problem then is how you find a forum in which all of this can be run. And President Macron set this framework up a few years ago called the European Political Community, which steps outside of the European Union and allows us to manage the continent more effectively. And if that were used, I think that Britain would be happy with that.
Nina, to you, one big American elephant in the room is President Trump. Both men seem to be getting on well with him and having a positive relationship. He hasn't called them out too much. How important is that going forward then, how they deal with Trump?
Do you mean Keir Starmer and Emmanuel
Starmer and
Macron? I think they're obviously the two interlocutors from this part of the world. One of them is, you just heard there from John and Raphael earlier, that the UK is in this interesting position where it's able to be a Trump whisperer, if you like, because it's not beholden to being part of the big single market that essentially America wants to trade-wise smash its way into. It doesn't have the same sort of huge trade deficits that Donald Trump is so focused on, and as a result, it's in a luxurious position where it can sort of, stay above the fray. But the real issue here is that this is about more than economics, isn't it? It's about now we're into the post-Pax Americana era where countries don't get the same benefit from being economically and politically allied with the United States as they have done in years gone by. And the question is, will Europe be able to coalesce quickly enough in whichever forum and format it is to try and stand up for its own values and its own defence as well? I think that is essentially what they have to figure out, whether it's Keir Starmer in the UK, whether it's Emmanuel Macron over in France, sort of representing European security assets, because let's face it, France is the best hope they have of making the type of weaponry and some kind of thinking about advocating on behalf of that broader strategic autonomy for Europe.
Bence, President Trump has been very vocal in his view that Europe has had a free ride, defence-wise, on the back of US tax dollars. Has he got a point?
Yes, he has. So it is not only Donald Trump who made this point. Actually, even Eisenhower, when he was a president in the early 1950s, made the same point. And all of the presidents for the last 70-plus years made this point. And there was a very important speech from Bob Gates, who was the defense secretary of President Obama and also George W. Bush in 2011, that sometimes down in the line, Europeans will have a problem because if they rely too much on the US, the political establishment in the US will not tolerate and will lose the patience to subsidize European defense. And now I think we arrived to this point.
So, Raphael, just give us the French view of how Macron is handling Trump, because you couldn't pick two more different men if you tried to.
But I think right from the start, Macron had European ambition. But in a way, I think his ambition, the nature of his ambition towards Europe has changed over time. And now I think he's not thinking so much about the European Union, as I said before, but he's trying to become the leader, I would say, in a way, of the democratic world, of the free world, what we called before the free world, like, democracy on one side against oligarchy on the other side. He has really, I think he has that in the mind. And I think he's right, because when I was saying that Europe is becoming some kind of a new, has some kind of a new gravity center, that also means that even outside Europe geographically, some countries might feel European. I'm thinking about Canada, for instance, but it could be that other country could be interested to get closer to Europe. Europe is becoming more of a symbol of something that is safer, that the volatility, for instance, of the way Donald Trump is running the country, and that is a protection for democracy, a sanctuary for democracy.
John, to
I
you,
think he's thinking about that.
John, just tell me, do you think Macron has had a bounce in popularity in the last few weeks as he's been more prominent in terms of dealing with the crisis in Ukraine, handling the Trump administration? Give me your impression of where Macron sits now with the French public.
Well, his popularity has gone up since he began that first visit to Washington and his discussions with Trump. His popularity has gone up by something like 7 points, I think. So it was very low just before that. It was really at its nadir, the worst he's been in in the 7 to 8 years that he's been in power. So that is very helpful, and he's actually playing on it. And so is the same is true of Keir Starmer as well, whose popularity has not been very high, but had a bounce after he met up with Trump recently in the White House. And so you can see that both politicians are taking to the world stage as a way of boosting their domestic popularity, as well as doing a number of other things, rightfully, it seems to me, for democracy. And if I could just add to Raphael's excellent point about how a new form of democracy a network of democracy is developing. The fact that Australia, New Zealand, Canada wish to contribute to something that's going on in Central Europe is quite remarkable.
Nina, same point to you. I mean, here in the UK, Keir Starmer has struggled domestically for several months, and suddenly he is seen as Europe's best hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's face it, Donald Trump, we already knew from his first presidency, when he was first elected in 2016, that he's a bit of a Marmite man, isn't he, particularly here in Europe. So it is expedient for some of these leaders, particularly in France, and I grew up in the French system, there is still a very vibrant anti-American feeling underneath it all politically that Emmanuel Macron can capitalise on. Less of that in the UK, but the point is this is still the strongest country in the world, the most powerful country in the world. And if they can be seen as simultaneously having a constructive working relationship with Donald Trump, but actually taking on the mantle of those values that America used to champion for their own people, like, quote unquote, being the leader of the free world, that is very expedient to two big characters like that. It's also very, very important for Emmanuel Macron because he can't run again and his time is up in 2027. And the only way he can now make a legacy for himself is internationally because, of course, he's lost the domestic remit after those ill-fated elections last year.
So, Bence, looking at the defence side of things in the months and years to come with Ukraine, how can France and the UK ensure that it is Europe first in terms of providing the security guarantees that Ukraine needs?
So there is, the European countries don't have any other choice because now it is clear that the US is not willing to put as much effort and resources into European security as before. It is clear that the Trump administration wants to focus on Asia, especially on China, and they are quite clear about this, that they see the investments, the security investments in Europe is something that they don't have enough return for them. So we don't have any choice. So the Europeans have to work together much more closely. But still there is a problem because we are talking about 27 EU member states or 30 plus NATO member states. And each member states have slightly different policy kind of preferences. For instance, the frontline states who are close to Russia, they take defense more seriously, spend much more than those ones, for instance, on the southern flank, like Spain, Italy, Portugal. And it will be a big challenge for France and UK to try to coordinate these different kind of policy preferences throughout Europe.
Nina, just come in on that.
Yeah, and I also want to point out that, it depends who you buy your weaponry from. So obviously big countries like Poland, for instance, have had huge orders. I had a look at the American order book just last year. They ordered something like $10 billion worth of HIMARS. We've had other states in the Baltics and elsewhere that have been buying an awful lot of US weaponry. And you hear time and time again, speaking to German politicians from the Christian Democratic Union, that obviously has just won this last election and is poised to take control of the Chancellery in Germany, that yes, they have big orders of American weaponry on the books, like, for instance, a big order for F-35 fighter jets, but they're starting to rethink whether or not the United States is the ally that they should be ordering those types of weaponry from. So you also have different makeups in where people are buying their weapons from, and that'll have big implications when it comes to being able to maintain this type of weaponry and also get access to all of the infrastructure that's needed from the United States if Donald Trump's presidency continues to be so unreliable and turbulent.
Raphael, just talk me through the French view of boots on the ground in Ukraine. I mean, if it comes to it and French soldiers get deployed there, how will that be received by the French public?
Oh, I think right now the French public is really not ready for that. I mean, for direct intervention. But on the other way around, as it was said before, the popularity of Emmanuel Macron just grew with his international politics, and is becoming the most, really someone that is trying to back Ukraine, and the one that is supposed to be some kind of that would defend democracy, and Ukraine is also becoming like the symbol of democracy. So step by step, I think the opinion of French people is changing all that, but are not ready yet. That doesn't mean they will not be ready in a few months. It might be on its way. It could happen, but right now I think the French public isn't really ready for that.
John, give us your view on Macron's future then, because the clock is ticking. He has 2 years left, and then we don't know who will come in.
No, there's very little clarity on the horizon about who would come in after 2027. But one of the things that could happen, of course, is the more extreme things that in 2027. I mean, there is, if you look at the polling, then there is a possibility that Marine Le Pen might come into power by then. And that would change things very considerably again, because her position on Ukraine has been, let's say, reluctant, to put it at its best. And so the sale of long-distance weaponry was something that she was opposed to. So you can see that in the longer term, France could be in a more difficult position in the next 2 years once President Macron is gone, because he has fought for democratic interests in Europe and in the European continent.
Nina, to you, I mean, Starmer and Macron, they have their critics and they get a lot of abuse. Europe could be in a far worse position. I mean, if Marine Le Pen was running France and Nigel Farage was running the UK...
Well, Nigel Farage might end up running the UK at this rate.
Yeah.
That is also a possibility, not just Marine Le Pen running France. Marine Le Pen, however, though, is not as much of a fan of Donald Trump as Nigel Farage, of course, is, having sort of burnished his political credentials at the CPAC conferences, and outside the golden elevator gates with Donald Trump. Marine Le Pen actually has been a bit more hostile towards Donald Trump. So I don't necessarily think that they would be able to, even if they were rising to prominence in these countries and getting into big positions of power, that they would have the same type of relationship with Donald Trump. But yes, you're right. It appears as though Europe, at least in these two leaders, has quite a few clear heads. But we haven't talked about Germany yet, and there's going to be a new chancellor in Germany. Germany's CDU, centre-right party, hasn't just got the largest number of votes in this recent election and got the hands on the chancellery. They've also got the most powerful bloc inside the European Parliament, and they've got Ursula von der Leyen, one of their politicians, into a second term at the helm of the all-powerful European Commission. So I think you're going to see very much a more resurgent Germany as well, that Franco-German axis continuing to steer the EU. And so we'll have Friedrich Merz probably on stage alongside people like Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron. So he's a third party to consider.
And Bence, just on that excellent point from Nina, militarily, the Germans have given more to Ukraine than anyone else in Europe.
Yes, that's correct. So the problem is with the Germans. I mean, the perception about the Germany is that although they give a lot of resources, money, and also weapons to Ukraine, but they are always reluctant to do this. So the perception is that, for instance, the British are much more stronger supporter of Ukraine, despite the fact that they provided less weapons, because the British always are the first to provide, for instance, main battle tanks or different missile systems. And I think if Germany can change this perception with the new government, it can increase or improve Germany's standing in Eastern Europe and also in Ukraine.
So, Raphael, to you, back to my first point, this really is a hugely important relationship. Historically, it had always been very, very important. But Europe really right now needs strong France and a strong UK working together.
Oh, I think, yes, I think we need that. And I think it is actually working. But just if you allow me to just say a little thing about Marine Le Pen and all that, and the fact that we could have a green future after 2 years, I don't think so, because I think that maybe exactly what is happening now and the attitude of Emmanuel Macron and the fact that his popularity is growing goes against will prevent, I think, Marine Le Pen to get to be president, because it looks like strong. And the fact that Trump is behaving in such a volatile way, even people from the right wing here, now that were for Trump at first, are criticizing. And so people want to have a government that is strong, but in the same time, they want democracy. And so, in fact, Trump is becoming like the common enemy even of the right and the left. So I don't think Marine Le Pen, because that will get into power, will reach the presidency.
And John, your final thoughts on just the absolute importance of this relationship going forward now for Europe in the next few years?
Well, as I pointed out at the beginning, historically, it has been a strong relationship. There's perhaps too much concentration on the differences between France and Britain over the years. And yet, when push comes to shove, France and Britain have always stood together, whether it be in the Crimean War or the First World War or the Second World War, or a number of other smaller occasions when that's happened, for instance, over Libya. So I think that they can work together. And I think if they find a proper level of entente, if I were them, I would avoid the big question of the European Union and keep it outside in the EPC, for instance. Then I think lots of things that would be well worth doing could be done, which would give some kind of defence backbone to Europe, which it doesn't have at the moment.
John, Raphael, Bence and Nina, thank you all so much for your insight. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable, TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.